laying down the and yeah. Ooh, notes are being taken, dude.
No,
Watch
notes are
out.
being taken because you have too many
Gemini.
good
I
things
see
to
you
say.
working, Gemini.
I can see you working. Gemini's brilliant. But listen, I wanted to ask you, just because you're so damn brilliant all the time, I wanted to have a little conversation about, and I know you have these conversations with people individually, but I get emails and stuff all the time, and people are always reaching out and being like, I got questions about, if Thunderbro would ever do some sort of like nutrition line, but that's so much further down the line. But can you talk to me a little bit about supplements that you think everyone should take, whether it's female, whether it's male, just like super baseline ones, and then stuff people could consider?
Yeah, let me like throw these into kind of buckets, right? So I'll go over like generally good supplements for most people, regardless of their goals, that tend to be areas that typically will need a little bit of extra attention that maybe they're not getting in their regular diets,
Mm-hmm.
or based on the season, and the lifestyle, what might really help. And then we can go into some supplements specific to things like one of the big goals for a lot of people is like reducing body fat,
Yep.
and growing muscle mass. And then maybe some stuff just a bit around like hormones and things like that, depending on your age demographic and your biometrics. So yeah, I mean, like, listen, the context of supplements is already embedded within the name. It's
Totally.
supplementary
Yeah.
to a good whole foods diet. So, if you're someone out there who is not really dialed in with your nutrition, I wouldn't even worry about supplements yet. I really wouldn't. I would start by, maybe begin with like maybe a food quality approach initially and be like, okay, how can I take out the things in my diet that are really not serving me? For most people, that's going to be stuff like highly processed foods, sugar, sodas, things that have maybe elements that can garner like autoimmune responses. So that could be things like dairy or grains or legumes. The only way to really know if you're sensitive to that stuff is to take them out of your diet and see how you feel, and then like
Yeah.
reintroduce them one by one. But I would say nowadays, a lot of people, especially as they get older, develop like gluten sensitivities, dairy sensitivities, and that kind of stuff. And try to put into your diet the best, highest utility foods you can, which for me starts with protein. So, having a diet rich with good animal proteins. There's no better source than like red meat. Not only is it very bioavailable, but it tends to be really nutrient dense, especially whether you're getting it grass fed or just regular ground beef. Because of the way that bovines are and the amount of stomachs, you don't have to worry as much about getting organic red meat versus things like chicken, right? Because you get a lot more of whatever it is they're eating, in the meat. With red meat, it's not quite as intense. So any kind of red meat is good. Steak, lamb, um, you know, uh, all the delicious stuff. Eggs are probably like really underutilized. But that's again something like you need to gauge if you have like egg sensitivities. Some people, as they get older, develop some egg sensitivities, but if you can eat eggs, whole eggs are fantastic because they're such a valuable source of leucine, which is the most important amino acid for growing muscle. They're
Mm.
also full of really good cholesterol, which is going to be very supportive of your hormones. Fatty fish like salmon, and really anything where you can get a good amount of omega-3 fatty acids is a really important piece to the diet. And all of these are going to be tied to, not just your performance markers like having muscle mass, but a lot of like hormone markers that will decline as you get older, inflammation markers that you try to control, and even things like blood sugar sensitivity, right? By introducing more meat, that increases your metabolic rate. That can increase your insulin sensitivity. It typically pushes out much worse choices like sugar laden things because meat's a lot more filling.
Mm.
And then with that, I would just put a garnish of your favorite fruits and vegetables, right? So there's no wrong fruit or vegetable. You kind of see what you like to eat, what you respond well to. For a lot of these things, you can be your own laboratory by just paying attention to, after a meal, how your digestion goes. If you're getting like really bloaty or farty, chances are there was something in there that you might be reacting to a little bit. If you feel good and you're having good digestion, it's probably a go. But
Mm.
starting there with food quality is the best place, and then the layer on top of that is really dialing in the quantities of those things, like the macronutrient balance, like exactly how many grams of protein, carbs, and fat you're eating a day. Maybe even more individual food choices, like what foods tend to work really well for you, not just the ones you like, but the ones that like you back, and doing that consistently. Once you have all those things in place, now supplements is a great area to like cover your bases or fill in gaps. So let me give you an example of what that means. If
Mm.
you have like say a protein target that's 250, 280 grams of protein, which is not that uncommon for a guy who's like around 200 pounds, especially a guy who's maybe trying to like recomposition. That is a lot of protein to get into your system every day. And to be able to get that from animal sources alone, one, is going to be very filling, it's going to be very expensive, and it's going to actually put a little bit of stress on your body to like have to break down all that meat.
Mm.
So using something like a protein, I would call it like kind of like a protein substitute, protein powders. There's lots of different ways you can kind of incorporate this, but like a good whey protein powder, especially one that's of good quality. Maybe it's grass-fed whey. Maybe they have a nice panel of amino acids that are in there. Um, that's a great way to be able to hit that target without having to put all that stress on your digestive system,
Mm.
right? Or to pay all that money to eat pounds and pounds and pounds of meat.
Yeah.
Another way you can get that for a lot of people is with things like egg whites or Greek yogurt, but protein powder is nice because it's convenient. And so if you're eating every 3 hours, instead of having to prepare 5 meals a day, maybe it's more like 3 meals, and your two snacks are like protein powder based
Mm.
snacks, whether it's like a shake or a protein powder and some oatmeal, where you can get that stuff in and it doesn't sit super heavy. Also, like even close to bedtime, right? Because if you're eating a big meal close to bedtime, that will disrupt your sleep.
Mm.
So having something lighter before bedtime that still gives you the protein is really valuable. So that's one example. And I think that protein powder is probably like, just a good one for any athlete to have, just to be
Like
able to
top,
hit
top.
their
Yeah.
their protein targets if they're not hitting them with meat, or if it's a higher target, which most of the time the way we program nutrition, we're typically getting all athletes into what's called a positive nitrogen balance, which means a bit of a protein surplus, just
Mm.
because that fixes so many issues, and it tends to really help with composition, help with muscle mass, help with hormones, help with metabolic rate. So usually protein is kind of the first place we start when we were engineering nutrition systems. The other ones, so I think that depending on the how much fruits and vegetables you're getting, you might find that you may be deficient in certain minerals. Sometimes it's because you're not absorbing them. Sometimes
Mm.
it can be things like you might have like a methylation defect where you just have a hard time processing the B vitamins that's in fruit, and processing folate. So getting things with like a methylated B vitamin, because a lot of people do have methylation issues, something that has like methylcobalamin, that's usually pretty valuable. But I would say just a good multivitamin will contain that,
Mm.
and a good multivitamin is just a nice blanket. I like one from, there's a lot of good brands. I like Thorn, I like Nordic Naturals, just something really simple where you're getting a lot of stuff in there that kind of covers your bases depending on what you may be missing in your diet. Omega-3 fatty acids, which are really, really important for controlling inflammation, for heart health, for brain health, for any inflammatory conditions, like helping you recover, even for insulin sensitivity. It's a very kind of blanket supplement that most people will benefit from. And the easiest way to get that is with fish oil. So, unless you're eating
Yeah.
salmon multiple times a week, which most people are not, um, going to like a good fish oil supplement, you're looking for things like EPA and DHA, which are the active ingredients. And you want to get, 2 to 3 grams of those two elements combined. So you can do the math by just doing some calculations based on what's on the back of the bottle to figure
Mm.
out how many pills you should be taking. But that's a really good one just to have. A lot of the foods we eat will have omega 6s, which are inflammatory, and we need those in the body. But you can also, most of the time that ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s is really skewed towards the omega-6s,
Mm,
and not as much the omega-3s. So that tends to just be a good overall supplement. And you can read about some of the remarkable benefits of fish oil beyond just performance and aesthetics, but also for like health and longevity.
yeah.
I wouldn't overdo it with the fish oil. Just a regular moderate dose is
Yeah.
plenty. You don't have to go crazy. It doesn't have to be super high dose. It's not like more is necessarily better, but just enough to get that into your diet. Um, Branched chain amino acids are another really good one for most people. And I think especially once now you get into some of these other buckets like reducing body fat, which is a very common goal for people. Having some BCAAs, especially around training, around cardio, can really be helpful because they help stimulate a hormone called glucagon. And what glucagon does is it takes glycogen stores, which are essentially like energy stores in your liver and your muscle and your fat tissue, and it helps convert that glycogen back into glucose to raise your blood sugar when it gets a little bit too low. So, if you're doing a session, let's say you're doing like fasted cardio and, your blood sugar is starting to wean down and you're doing some light activity and pairing that with the BCAAs, that's a great way to really help stimulate glucagon so you can shrink fat cells and really tap into fat stores or enhance
Mm,
that effect. They're also I would call them like muscle sparing. So if you're in like a caloric deficit, and you're not getting quite enough food to sustain your current mass to reduce any kind of muscle wasting, having some BCAAs can be helpful, especially, things like glutamine is another, really important amino acid that
mm,
helps with muscle sparing. It's also great for your gut health. So those pair up really well, kind of on the fat loss, muscle gain side of things.
mm,
The BCAAs will energize you to a degree because they're going to help release some of that stored energy. So, like even in a training session, a lot of pre-workouts will contain a blend of like caffeine with BCAAs,
mm.
which that's fine if you like caffeine. I usually just do coffee, but the pre-workouts, if they give you better workouts and they're not affecting you adversely, they're not stretching out your thyroid or
Mm,
causing cortisol issues, you're not masking energy issues and being too dependent on it. That's totally fine. You can have that stuff in there, but the BCAAs, I think, probably have a bit more context overall, just for helping people out with regard to
yeah.
training composition. Um, on the muscle gaining side, again, like it really comes down to calories and nitrogen balance. So you do need to get a lot of calories, but to the same note, if you're eating 5,000 calories, um, which is probably going to be 5 or 6 meals a day to be able to do that if you're trying to like bulk up or gain, you might find that it's really hard to get all of that from like real whole foods because that's a high volume of food, right? So if you can get stuff where maybe you're incorporating things like meal replacement shakes, and there's some really good meal replacement shakes that just have like different very readily available sources of carbs, fast and slow digesting, sweet potato and dextrose, and you'll
Mm,
see these marketed as like mass gainers. I use that with a lot of athletes, especially younger athletes, kids in high school and college that are like playing sports that are having a
yeah.
hard time gaining weight. I'm like, take 1,000 calorie mass gainer shake because even when you're too full to eat, you're usually able to drink. So that's another good one. And then beyond like the general stuff where we're talking about okay, gaining muscle, losing body fat, just overall health supportive supplements. Um, there's a lot of context that you might see in someone's blood work. So, for instance, if somebody has like kidney values that are really high, like your kidney's stressed out, which is common for people that train a lot or eat a
Mm,
lot of protein, right? It's just you break down muscle, and that muscle, the byproducts of that muscular breakdown, enter your bloodstream, and your kidneys need to process that. I think that like there are some supplements and protocols out there that can really help. I mean, even stuff as simple as like drinking higher volumes of water, but
mm,
supplements like cranberry can be really helpful. Supplements like Tudka can be really helpful in improving kidney and liver values if you find that those are a little bit high. There's a lot of interesting stuff. Milk thistle, those things are really good for just helping your body's filtration process. So that kind of depends on blood work, but I think a lot of athletes, when we look at their blood work, they're like, oh, like my creatinine's really high. There are some easy supplements that you can put in there to help improve that, along with maybe some dietary hydration protocols that can really help that. There's also stuff like supplements like extreme endurance, which is honestly, like it's a lot of sodium bicarbonate, which helps reduce the CK levels in the body, and it's a very
Oh.
simple supplement, but it can be helpful in improving those things. If you're finding that they're consistently high, you might incorporate that around training just to help your body process a lot of it.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and like they have supplements for everything. I would say that a lot of the supplements that are marketed about like testosterone boosting, at least the ones that you'll find in like the vitamin shop
Yeah.
supplement stores, really are not worth that much in terms of the benefits, So I think a lot of the stuff that they're marketing in sports supplements does not really have much evidence to support it, much real
Hmm.
science or evidence to kind of say like, well, this is going to do what we're saying it does. You can make any claim you want in the supplement space, So I like to stick with the simple things. Creatine is one that a lot of people ask about,
There it
and it
is.
can be a great supplement. I think it's a great supplement for longevity too. But again, if you're eating a lot of animal protein, right? If you're eating a lot of red meat and eggs, like you probably don't need to supplement with more creatine. Or if your creatinine values are like already really high, probably
Hmm.
don't need more creatine in your system. Um, and I always encourage people first, like see what you can get from your diet, because that's going
Yeah.
to have the most utility overall, and then fill in the gaps with the other stuff. For people that are now entering like the holiday season, where summer's gone, you're not outside as much, the days are shorter, the weather's colder, you're probably not receiving as much sunlight exposure, direct sunlight exposure on your skin or your torso, unless you're popping your shirt off on your lunch break at work or
There
something,
you go.
which I would
Right.
encourage. But a good D3 supplement is probably very valuable for most people, especially in the winter months. And being around 5,000 or 10,000 IUs of D3 is a very reasonable dose to think about supplementing with. I like going with individual supplements. I tend to focus more on the brands, just in terms of like the quality and the cleanliness and the purity of the supplements. So I use Thorn for a lot of stuff just because I know that they make really good, clean, potent supplements. And so I would encourage you to, like, if you're looking for a good D3 or a fish oil or a multi or whatever, like you can go over there, and they probably have something that's going to be of high efficacy. A lot of the stuff you find in supplement stores is garbage. It's got like a lot of fillers. It's not really
Yeah.
what it says it is. The potency is not very high. Like no one, they don't really test that. The FDA doesn't enforce that it has to be, what it says it is. A lot of people like spike their protein with branched chain amino acids to make it look like it's more protein, or they say there's this much, bioavailable stuff in it when there really isn't. So, I think going with reputable brands is very important. And the marketing in some of these brands is fantastic. It looks sexy and cool, but I would go with like the simple, boring ones that just work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, those were awesome, like tiers of like from like top down. And I love that the first one was like, hey, make sure that everything is like in line before you start doing the supplements. And just one more question, because I know we have to head into our next meeting. What's like something that you would, encourage people to like not even like stay away from, but if you're like, hey, because you just said marketing, right? There's so many
Yeah.
marketing things where people are like, oh, you have you mentioned like testosterone boosters, but there's a lot of people that use like fat burners, like what are some
Mhm.
things you're like, hey, like maybe try to avoid those.
I would stay away from like the testosterone boosters. I would stay away from those.
Yeah.
Even if there are ingredients in there that can be helpful, usually it's some proprietary blend where there's so little of those ingredients to even like make a dent. If you're interested in improving your testosterone, go to a longevity doctor, and
Mm.
and they'll figure out like peptides or different pharmaceuticals, like real ways that can improve it. If there's diet and lifestyle things too, that's like very low hanging fruit. Honestly, for most people, if they want to see an improvement in their testosterone levels, probably just like eating more good healthy fats and sleeping more is going to make a much bigger improvement than any testosterone booster you'll find in a supplement shop. The pre-workouts sometimes have like a really high amount of stimulants and caffeine.
Hmm.
So I'd be careful with that, especially above a certain age. If you're a guy dealing with like high blood pressure, or if you feel like, if like I said, if you're masking energy issues, The best pre-workout you can have, honestly, is like salt and water and carbs. Like that's going to give you the best workouts, you know. But I think people become addicted to like the high of their Monster Energy drink, and
Yeah.
that stuff really can stress out your kidneys quite a bit and cause other issues, especially with a lot of long-term use. So I would maybe steer a little bit away from that. For the fat burners, those can be super duper effective, but also they usually contain a lot of stimulants. So I would do it for just like a period of time. So if you're doing like a cut, you know, maybe it's an 8 to 12 week cut, I would only really use it for that period. And I would only use it when you need to, right? So when you're not really making progress on your own and things are getting a little bit slow, that can be a tool you can use to throw some fuel on the fire to keep the progress, or it, maybe even at the end when like, okay, you know, the calories are really low, you're getting really tired, maybe your metabolic rate is starting to drop a little bit, that can really fire things up a bit. And I would use that way, you know, in prepping for shows. I would usually use it like the last 6 weeks of a show. If I did just like a little bit of those like fat burners, Lipo 6, what is it, hydroxy cut. Those are really effective ones. But again, like I wouldn't call them supportive of your health. They are effective at reducing body fat. But you know, you just kind of have to take it for what it is. There's no real such thing as good or bad. There's only kind of context and compromise on these things. So, you know, that can line up well for fat loss. And the other thing I wanted to mention is like for athletes we have that are kind of like maybe approaching 40 or over 40s, especially men and women, like something like the fish oil and maybe even like a coenzyme Q10. A good fatty diet with like again salmon and steak and eggs, that is really gonna that's really going to help for the hormone production, but also for the longevity. You know, adding in those heart supplements, they can really improve things like your inflammatory markers, your cardiac health, your cognitive health. So I think I would start with that stuff first if you're in that demographic.
Heck yeah. Dave, I learned a lot. So
Let's
thank
go.
you. Let's go, brother. All
All
right.
right.
Well, I'll see you in a little.
I will see you on the next call. Thanks, Anthony.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.